is still on the throne.
Okay, so just a little bit of review right now. This is after the Lord's Supper, and then Jesus predicts that Peter's going to deny him. But remember, when we looked at Luke's gospel, we're in Matthew's gospel right now in chapter 26. But when we looked at the parallel passage in Luke's gospel, we saw that Jesus said he was going to, Satan demands to sift Peter as wheat. But Jesus said, but I have prayed for you. So when you get through this, you need to strengthen the brethren. And that's reassuring for us that our God is the God of a second chance. There isn't a person in this room in one way, shape, or form, even after we got saved, where we didn't blow it on one occasion or another. And we just thought, oh Lord, you can never use me again. I'm good for nothing for your kingdom. Yet our God is the God of a second chance. He's the God who lifts us up, dusts us off, and gets us right back out there. And we need to, and with Peter, teachers incur stricter judgment, James tells us. And he was pretty much the lead teacher of the apostles. So, that was woodshed time, big time. And but our God is the God of a second chance. Jesus then goes into the Garden of Gethsemane and he prays that the cup of suffering and death would pass if there's any other way to redeem mankind. But then Jesus said, but not my will, but your will be done. And that's the pattern for our prayer. Our prayers should be that whenever we ask for something, if we're not 100% sure, and I think the only way we can be 100% sure is if God made it clear either in his word or in our hearts that, there were times when Peter and John just commanded a lame man to stand and walk because God made it 100% sure to them. God spoke to their hearts, I want this guy healed now. But more times than not, we're like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. When we go into a fiery furnace, we say, my God is able to deliver me. Now, if that's not his will, we're still going to love him and serve him anyway. We're going to burn, but we're still going to love him just the same. And so allow God to make the calls. The secret of prayer is not you and I dragging God off the throne to do our will. The secret of prayer is us putting on the mind of Christ so that we begin to desire and seek his will. Okay? And too many times we're not content being in God's will. We want something outside of God's will. We've got to say, Father, not my will, but your will be done. As Jesus was praying, he asked the disciples to stay awake with him. If the disciples had stayed awake with Jesus, he would have still suffered. He would have still been scourged. He would have still died. Okay? Nothing would have changed. Yet God became a man, and he asked his closest friends to just be there with him. There's times when I do hospital visitation, or John does hospital visitation, or Pastor Willis, and there's times when we don't even know what to say. And I found out real early. I remember I used to visit, I used to try to prepare a sermon for Lucky Leslie when I'd go to, he was on his deathbed 2 or 3 different times over a 10 or 15 year period before he went to be with the Lord. And I'd try to prepare messages for him, and I'd go there, and all he cared was that I was there. I was just by his side. In fact, he would say things that would motivate me, so I started calling him the sermon of a suffering saint. It's amazing how close we can get to the Lord if we suffer and still cling to the Lord. And all Jesus was asking was that they just be there with him. My dad, he didn't die alone. He had his brothers and sisters and his kids all around his side. And sometimes you just got to be there for people. But the apostles, what do? They fell asleep. And that was my question for you last week. Are we awake with Jesus or asleep on watch? We're supposed to be watchmen. There's a lot of false prophets right now that are crying, peace, peace, when there is no peace. We had a Secretary of State saying this is the safest time that we've ever had, this period of time right now when it comes to terrorism. And it's like, dude, what planet are you on? You know? I don't know. Maybe the guy's smoking something. I don't know. But it's just like, when you constantly say peace, peace, if there is no peace, the Bible classifies you in Ezekiel and Jeremiah as a false prophet. And somebody's got to be awake on watch. And if it's not the church, I don't know who it's going to be. Okay? But bad things are coming down. The demonic realm is just getting stronger and stronger and stronger in this country and throughout Western civilization. And all most Christians in America care about is whether or not they can afford that new car. I would argue we're asleep on watch. We've got to sound the alarm. Paul, when he talks about the end times, tells us that the Lord's return will be like a thief in the night, and therefore we need to be sober. We don't need to walk around, stumble around in darkness. We need to see the signs of the time. We need to have the newspaper in one hand and the Bible in the other hand. Even that's not easy, because our newspapers don't even talk about the real important news. It's usually some celebrity in a scandal or something. But the most important stuff, you got to dig now, usually on the internet or something, to try to find out what is really going on in the world. I mean, how many people here even know we have animal-human hybrids right now? And they're almost always, now we're using animal-human hybrids. We freeze them in the embryonic stage because we don't want to bring them to birth, because then if the thing is human enough, it's going to sue them. But right now we're basically taking stem cells from, we're taking stem cells from aborted babies, and we're also doing experiments with animal-human hybrid embryos, and we're using those to make human organs and trying to experiment. I'm telling you, Joseph Mengele would be proud, the Nazi doctor. And so I don't know. You may be faced with a decision someday. You may need a kidney, and time is running out, and they may offer you a kidney that you know came from an aborted baby, that they grew the organ from an aborted baby. And this is the depraved new world that we find ourselves in. Are you awake with Jesus, or are you asleep on watch? You could study the news, but if you don't study God's Word, you're not going to be able to interpret the news from God's perspective. And so we've got to be awake. Then we looked at verses 47 to 56, the betrayal and arrest in the Garden of Gethsemane. Remember, and we also read the parallel passage in John 18, 1 to 11, to get a little more information there. And remember, Jesus was betrayed by a friend. When we think of Judas, if I asked you for 100 words to describe Judas, probably the words friend of Jesus would probably not show up in those first 100 words. Yes, that's what he's referred to in the Old Testament, predicting that Jesus would be betrayed by a friend, and Jesus calls him his friend. And so I reminded everybody that if Jesus is your friend, is merely your friend and nothing else, okay, you're still hellbound. You say, well, Jesus is my bro, man. We just hang out. We're good together and all. Hey, that's not good enough. You got to worship Jesus as your God and trust in Him alone for salvation in order to be saved. And it better be the true Jesus of the Bible. Not some false Jehovah's Witness or Mormon Jesus. I had 2 Mormons come by my house the other day. Pray for them. Ivan from Texas and Brandon from Utah. And they're Jesus. I don't believe it. So I was really glad when they asked me to close in prayer, because I don't want them, I'm not going to pray with them. They're praying to a false God. They've got a false Jesus. So we've got to trust in the true Jesus of the Bible alone for salvation and worship him as God. He's got to be more than just your friend. And we saw where between 200 and 600 Roman soldiers fell down when Jesus said "Ego Emi." He identified himself as the I Am, Yahweh, who spoke to Moses, the Eternal One who was in covenant with his people, Israel. Just the words coming out of his mouth, identifying himself, was enough to knock 200 to 600 Roman soldiers on their back. By the way, we have friends of mine, some of them, but evangelical scholars, claim to be Bible-believing scholars, now explaining away that passage and saying it never happened. Let me tell you, if Jesus could create the universe and he could rise from the dead, you better believe he can knock 200 to 600 Roman soldiers down on their backs with his spoken word. When we go through this narrative, through the death of Christ, we're going to see several other events that are being denied by members of the Evangelical Theological Society, the guys who train our future pastors. And so really keep me in prayer for that April conference in North Carolina. I've got to go because I'm presenting a paper trying to refute that. But evangelical leadership, I don't think, has ever been in a worse state in America than it is right now. But Jesus knocked these soldiers to their backs. Now, Peter sees this. We find out that the one who cuts off the high priest's servant's ear, you read the Gospel of John, it's Peter. Now, what was Peter doing with a sword? Well, if you read in Luke 22, 36 to 38, Jesus told the apostles, look, if you guys have an extra cloak, you ought to sell it and buy a sword. And then the apostles said, well, we already got 2 swords. And Jesus said, oh, okay, that's good enough. So the idea that Jesus would have been this big gun control fanatic if he were alive today, no, Jesus would say, no, I created you in my image, you're human beings, you have the right to defend yourself. And tonight, Jesus says, I don't want any of I got to die for the sins of mankind. But I don't want Peter to die tonight. I don't want John to die tonight. I want them to be protected. Now, keep in mind, Jesus has just knocked these soldiers, the Roman soldiers, to their back. I mean, to knock a Roman soldier down, I mean, that's... If you accidentally bumped into a Roman soldier and accidentally knocked him down, you got bragging rights till the day you die. Jesus knocks 200 to 600 of them down just with his spoken word. Okay? So Peter's thinking, wow, there might be 600 of them, but Jesus is on our side. We win this one. He's thinking Jesus is kind of depressed, pessimistic. He keeps talking about dying, but I've seen him raise the dead. I know when I read the Old Testament that Messiah will win the battle of Armageddon, Zechariah 14, 1-5. So if Jesus is reluctant, that's all right. He told me to bring a sword. I got a sword. I'm going to take off the head of the high priest servant, and I'm going to start the battle of Armageddon, and then I'm just going to sit back and watch Jesus finish it. So when you think about, not the apostles not understanding about the 2 distinct comings of Christ, what he did was really a tremendous act of faith. And that's what's scary. Sometimes we'll act out on faith, but sometimes our faith is there, but the theology isn't. And then Jesus scolded Peter. He healed the servant, and it turns out his name was Malchus. Healed him, and then scolded Peter and reminded Peter that, look, all I got to do, Peter, don't be protecting me. I don't need your protection, Peter. You think you're a tough guy, okay? But I don't need your protection. And what I got to do tonight, Peter. I got to die for mankind's sins. I don't need your protection. That sword was to protect yourself, and that guy meant no harm to you. Okay? Jesus said, I could just call for my Father, just pray to my Father, and he would send 12 legions of angels, which is 72,000 angels. Okay? That also means when Jesus was on the cross, he could have called for those angels. He could have said, enough is enough. I'm not going through this for these people who've declared war on me by their sinfulness. But he didn't. And but here, and by the way, when Jesus returns to win the battle of Armageddon, when he returns, Revelation 19, what is his weapon? The word of his mouth. Revelation 19, 11 to 16. So you could see why Peter did what he did. And by the way, he wasn't trying to, he was a fisherman. He wasn't an expert with a sword. He wasn't trying to cut off the guy's ear. He's probably trying to take off the guy's head, and the guy moved a little. Okay? But whatever the case, that was, you know, and keep this in mind, too. Peter is like, he was willing to battle hundreds of Roman soldiers side by side with Jesus. Okay? Yeah, his theology was confused, but he was willing to fight side by side with Jesus. Would you? Where would you have been at that point? I'm pretty sure where I would have been at that point. I would have been running as fast or faster than the other apostles who were taken off. Okay? And so before we slam Peter, we got to ask ourselves, where would we be at that particular time? Now look at Matthew 26, 57 to 68. Jesus before the Jewish ruling council. The ruling council has 70 members. I would be surprised if 50 of them were there for this. It was an illegal meeting called in the, you know, late at night. They just wanted to do away with Jesus. I'm sure they didn't invite Joseph, Arimathea, and Nicodemus, two of the elders, two of the Jewish rabbis, two of the Pharisees on the council that were believers of Jesus. I'm sure they were not there for this meeting. Starting in verse 57. And those who had laid hold of Jesus led him away to Caiaphas the high priest, where the scribes and the elders were assembled. But Peter followed him at a distance to the high priest's courtyard, and he went in and sat with the servants to see the end. Now, it is amazing. I guess when you're a teenager, you don't get a whole lot of mention, but John was actually there too. We learn when we read the other Gospels, John not only followed Jesus with Peter into the high priest's courtyard, but he actually went into the high priest's house because he was doing business with him. He probably sold fish to him and all. And so John's in first place among the apostles. He went not only behind enemy lines, he went all the way to the cross with Jesus, which may have been why John was the only of the apostles to not die a martyr's death, even though he was persecuted throughout his life. But it's not even mentioned. So sometimes when like Jesus and the Samaritan woman, I'm wondering if John, you know, he may have been the youngest of the apostles. He might have been only 12 or 13. I'm wondering if Jesus, because he was the one who rested his head on Jesus' shoulder. I'm wondering when Jesus talked to Nicodemus, was John there taking notes? When Jesus talked to the Samaritan woman, was John there taking notes? Now, it might be Jesus told them about what happened later on, but I do think we do know of certain times when John was there, when some of the gospel accounts don't even mention him. Okay? And we do that all the time, too. We say, you know, yeah, me and my wife went to British Columbia last year or whatever, and just going on and talking about it. And then somebody says, that's something, your grandson said he went there at such a time. I say, yeah, he was with us. And we just didn't mention it in the account. We've got to be selective in our accounts. Okay, verse 59, now the chief priests, the elders, and all the council sought false testimony against Jesus to put him to death, but found none. Even though many false witnesses came forward, they found none. But at last two false witnesses came forward and said, "This fellow said, I am able to destroy the temple of God and to build it in 3 days." Now, John mentions it in his gospel. At the beginning of Jesus' 3-year ministry, or however long it was, Jesus, when he entered Jerusalem, went into the court of the Gentiles and kicked out though the money changers and all. He also did it at the close of his ministry. The other Gospels talk about that. But at the earlier one, they said, "Give us a sign that you have the authority to cleanse the temple." And he said, "The only sign I'll give you is this: destroy this temple, I'll raise it up in 3 days." And they said, "Well, it took 46 years to build this temple, and you're going to build it in 3 days?" And then John said, but he was talking about the temple of his body. Okay? See, the temple wasn't even, the amazing thing is, the temple itself really, now understand me on this, the temple itself really wasn't a literal temple. Okay? A physical enclosure of the presence of God. It was just symbolic of the real temple. And Jesus was the real temple, the real incarnation of God. So this is why Jesus says in Matthew's gospel, one greater than the temple is here. So you think going into the Holy of Holies, which only the Jewish high priest can go once a year on Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, you think that's a holy place? That's just a type of me. I'm the real Holy of Holies. And so Jesus was just giving a prediction that he would raise his body from the dead in 3 days, and they said no. He said he was going to destroy the temple. And the high priest arose and said to him, Do you answer nothing? What is it these men testify against you? But Jesus kept silent. You know, in Isaiah 53, it talks about he was silent, like a lamb being led to the slaughter. He was silent. But you'll find Jesus did say some things when he was on trial, but he never spoke in defense of himself. So when it came to defending himself, he spoke not a word. He was silent. Every once in a while, he would say something for the benefit of those trying him or persecuting him. But Jesus kept silent. And the high priest answered and said to him, I put you under oath by the living God. Tell us if you are the Christ, the Messiah, the Son of God. Jesus said to him, it is as you said. Okay? Jesus is saying, you're right. I am the Messiah, the Christ, and the Son of God. And keep in mind, the title, the Son of God, John 5:17 and 18, the Jews wanted to stone Jesus not only because he was breaking the Sabbath, their own little Sabbath traditions, but because he was calling God his own Father, making himself equal with God. So we hear the phrase, the Son of God, we don't think God the Son, but that's exactly what the Jews thought. This guy is claiming to be God. So Jesus claims to be the Messiah and God. It is as you said. Nevertheless, I say to you, hereafter you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the power and coming on the clouds of heaven. Then the high priest tore his clothes, saying, He has spoken blasphemy. What further need do we have of witnesses? Look now you have heard his blasphemy. What do you think? They answered and said, He is deserving of death. Then they spat in his face and beat him, and others struck him with the palms of their hands, saying, Prophesy to us, Christ, who is the one who struck you? And so here's Jesus before the Jewish ruling council. Peter and John followed. Peter is going to lose his courage. Caiaphas, the high priest, is questioning him, and Jesus remained silent as far as defending himself. He did not defend himself, but he acknowledged to the high priest that he was the Son of God and the Messiah. Now, the high priest interpreted this to be blasphemy. Look at John chapter 10, verses 30 to 33. John 10, verses 30 to 33. And Jesus says this, I and my Father are one. Then the Jews took up stones again to stone him. Jesus answered them, many good works I have shown you from my Father. For which of those works do you stone me? The Jews answered him, saying, for a good work we do not stone you, but for blasphemy. And because you, being a man, make yourself God. So blasphemy is when a man claims to be God. See, but you should find two things. When a guy's claiming to be God, you should try to find two things. Number one, you should try to find, and this is before God the Son became a man. In Old Testament times, if a guy's claiming to be God, number one, you got to prove, okay, he's claiming to be God. And then number two, you got to prove that he's not God. You got to find some dirt on the guy. Okay? With Jesus, they never took the second step. All they could prove is that he claimed to be God and he's not denying it. By the way, don't ever let anybody tell you that Jesus was the greatest communicator who ever lived, which almost everybody agrees with, by the way. Jesus was one of the greatest communicators who ever lived, probably the greatest communicator who ever lived. But he never claimed to be God. Let me tell you, if Jesus of Nazareth never claimed to be God, he was the worst communicator who ever lived. Because that's why the Sanhedrin found him guilty and worthy of death, because he, being a man, makes himself out to be God. All Jesus had to say, if he never claimed to be God, was, whoa, 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 that was all symbolic language. I really wasn't claiming to be God. I'm just claiming to be a prophet. Or I'm just claiming to be the Messiah, but not God. I'm not claiming to be God. Jesus never said that. And so if Jesus is a great communicator, then the Jewish religious leaders trained in theology understood what he was saying. They understood his claims. And what did they do? They found him guilty of blasphemy because he, being a man, made himself out to be God. Jesus clearly claimed to be God on numerous occasions and did not deny it when he was on trial. If Jesus did not claim to be God, then why in the world did the Sanhedrin find him guilty of blasphemy? It would make no sense whatsoever. And now, the term Messiah, all the Jews are using the term Messiah. However, at the time of Jesus, all they understood the Messiah to be was a military conqueror. And so Jesus didn't want his mission, his ministry, to be defined by the common misconception of the term Messiah. So he only acknowledged that he was the Messiah to the Samaritan woman, to Peter when Peter got it right, and to the Jewish high priest. He never used those words. Jesus instead would call himself the Son of Man. Okay? Well, the Jews didn't know what the Son of Man meant. There wasn't a whole lot of speculation on it, but it comes from a passage in Daniel chapter 7. See, what Jesus wanted to do by using the term Son of Man, he could define his own ministry and not further the false expectation of Messiah as merely a military conqueror. So look at Daniel 7, 13 and 14. And Daniel says this, and I was watching in the night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man, coming with the clouds of heaven. He came to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him near before him. Then to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away, and his kingdom the one which shall not be destroyed. So the Son of Man is the one who's going to bring the kingdom of God to earth, and is going to reign over God's kingdom. Yet even more importantly, he is the one who comes with the clouds of heaven, which in Jewish understanding meant that you were divine. and you were bringing God's judgment with you. So it may, Gary Habermas, my old professor from Liberty University, he actually argues that the phrase the Son of God, though it entails deity, is not as robust a claim to be God as using the title the Son of Man. That when Jesus used the title the Son of Man, because of this passage, the Jews would have immediately recognized this guy is claiming to be God. And so Jesus acknowledged that he's the Son of God and the Messiah, and then he called himself the Son of Man. He's basically saying, you will see me coming amidst the clouds in power and glory to bring God's judgment upon the earth. I mean, when Zechariah predicts Messiah will come to earth to rescue Israel, Zechariah 14, 1-5, he calls him the Lord my God. He calls him both Yahweh and Elohim. Just like when doubting Thomas sees Jesus risen from the dead, in the Greek, he calls him Kurios and Theos. More than likely, he spoke Hebrew to him and called him Yahweh and Elohim, the Lord his God. And so basically, they declared Jesus to be guilty of blasphemy. Now, the Old Testament says that you stone to death a blasphemer. They pronounced the death penalty, but they knew that if they executed Jesus, the multitudes would probably tear them to shreds, and so they weren't going to do that. And so we're going to see in verses 1 and 2 of Matthew 27, when we get to it, that Jesus is sent to Pontius Pilate. Now look at Peter, where he denies Jesus, verses 69 to 75. Now Peter sat outside in the courtyard, and the servant girl came to him, saying, you also were with Jesus of Galilee. But he denied it before them all, saying, I do not know what you are saying. Here's this tough Peter backing down to girls, okay? And when he had gone out to the gate, here the guy who wanted to start Armageddon is now backing down from servant girls. And when he had gone out to the gateway, another girl saw him and said to those who were there, this fellow also was with Jesus of Nazareth. But again he denied with an oath, I do not know the man. And a little later those who stood by came up and said to Peter, surely you are also one of them, for your speech betrays you. He spoke with a Galilean accent. Then he began to curse and swear, saying, I do not know the man. Immediately a rooster crowed. And Peter remembered the word of Jesus, who had said to him, before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. So he went out and wept bitterly. Okay, now, we don't have time to look at it, but in John chapter 18, verse 18, we're told what kind of a fire it was that Peter warmed himself by. And it was a charcoal fire. And it's only mentioned twice in the New Testament. The other time is after Jesus rises from the dead, and he's cooking fish on the shore, and it's also a charcoal fire. So when Peter, and we'll get to that point, weeks to come, but when Peter swam out to meet Jesus rather than waiting for the boat, and then he tried to prove to Jesus how strong he was by dragging the net of fish, which the other 3 guys couldn't even lift out of the water with the help of the water, Peter dragged it onto land and ran. And Jesus said to Peter, do you love me more than these? Well, as soon as Peter gets up there, what's he going to smell? He's going to smell the charcoal fire. Now, how many times have we been somewhere where there's been this big catastrophe in our lives, or this important event, and the smell was really powerful? And anytime we smell that smell again, it reminds us, it brings us back. And Peter was there at that charcoal fire and warming himself. How many of us would choose a warm fire on a cold night rather than an allegiance to Jesus? Okay, and I tell you, man, I was just talking to Denny before the service, and I'm the biggest wimp in the cold. And, you know, there's times when I would almost give my right arm to be next to a warm fire on a cold night. But our allegiance to Jesus needs to be the priority in our lives. And you can say, well, yeah, but I'm feeling bad and I need this and need that. Hey, been there and done that, but we got to remain true to Jesus. What are we going to do? I mean, we got a country now that a government now that says that there's certain times when it's okay for us to torture people. After all the complaints we had about World War II and Vietnam with our POWs being tortured, and now our government says it's okay to torture. And who are they torturing? They're torturing terrorists. And many of our government leaders define Christians as terrorists. No basis for it. So just keep that in mind. If you're one of those evangelical Christians who screams, yeah, we need to torture these guys, that same government someday is going to have you on the table. And are you going to deny Christ because of some torture? Are you going to decide that bodily comforts are more important to me than my allegiance to Jesus? Peter denied Jesus 3 times. He wept bitterly. You know, he had true repentance, unlike Judas. See, the difference, and we're going to see when we talk about Judas and all, the difference between Peter's repentance and Judas's remorse, okay? Peter let his God down. Okay? Peter let his God down. I mean, we've all had times when we wanted to impress our dad and we struck out or we didn't get that hit, and we just feel so bad. We feel like we let our dad down. And Peter let his God down. Jude, on the other hand, his God died. And there's a big difference between those two. We're going to see that Judas's God was political power. And once he found out that there was no political future for himself, his God was dead. There was no reason to live. And he took his life. You don't think Peter wanted to kill him? Peter probably wanted to kill himself, but he thought, you know what? I would take my own life right now if it were mine to take. But it doesn't belong to me. I'm property of Yahweh. I'm property of Jesus. But it just hurt him that he let his God down. Now, before we slam Peter, just remember you got John was in first place. He followed Jesus all the way to the cross. Peter was in second place. He followed Jesus behind enemy lines into the courtyard of public enemy number 1, the high priest. All the other apostles were hiding under beds except for Judas, who betrayed Jesus. So keep in mind, Peter came in second place. Most of us are not going to sink in the water because we're not going to get out of the boat, myself included. Most of us are not going to deny Jesus 3 times because we'll never go behind enemy lines. Okay? I can remember when I had to deal with a house that was under heavy demonic attack, and I had to talk with the 12 guys who were going to go with me, and when I told them what some of the demons will do at times, like 9 of them said, we'll pray for you at a distance. When I confronted a Satan worshiper when I was in the Marine Corps, I asked the Marines I had led to Christ to go with me, and they said, no, we'll pray for you, we'll fast, and we'll pray for you, but we're not going there. And Peter was the kind of guy, he was out there on the field. He wasn't on the sidelines. It's easy to be a Monday morning quarterback and say, I would have thrown a better pass. I would have done things better than him. It's easy to sit on the sidelines and throw rocks and complain. As your pastor, I can tell you I would not have denied Jesus that night because I would have been hiding under a bed with the rest of the apostles. So just keep in mind, some of us don't have big falls because we never get high enough up to have a big fall. Okay? Now, what amazes me is not that Peter fell 3 times, that he denied him 3 times. What amazes me is how disappointed Jesus was with him. How Jesus expected so much more from him. So this guy went that far behind enemy lines, and Jesus said, you know, with the grace God has given you and the strength God has given you, you could have gone further. You could have been there side by side with John. But and so let's not be too hard on Peter, but the Lord Jesus is going to restore him. Now look at Matthew 27, 1 and 2. Matthew 27, 1 and 2. When morning came, all the chief priests and elders of the people plotted against Jesus to put him to death. And when they had bound him, they led him away and delivered him to Pontius Pilate, the governor. Pilate was the Roman governor of Judea from 26 to 36 A.D. He was very anti-Jewish. If there was a little uprising of Jews, he would just send in the Roman troops and they would just slaughter them. He was a Jew hater. Okay? He was not a wimp. I actually think that the Benito Mussolini-looking guy in Mel Gibson's The Passion was probably pretty accurate. Pontius Pilate was a ruthless governor and very anti-Jewish, slaughtered Jews. The problem was, though, that at this point the Jewish religious leaders had complaints so many times. They filed official complaints to the Roman emperor against Pilate that Pilate's political career was in the balance at this point. At the point that Jesus of Nazareth comes to him, Pilate, he hates the Jewish religious leaders with a passion, but he's at their mercy. One more complaint and his political career is toast. Okay? And so we'll talk about that next week. Now, verses 3 to 10 of 27, Judas commits suicide. Then Judas, his betrayer, seeing that he, Jesus, had been condemned, was remorseful and brought back the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and elders. He's saying, how many times do we do something we want to undo what we did? It was so bad, we feel so guilty, we want to undo what we did. Saying, I have sinned by betraying innocent blood. He's not saying he's not saying I betrayed my God and Savior. I just betrayed an innocent man. And they said, what is that to us? You see to it. Then he threw down the pieces of silver in the temple and departed and went and hanged himself. But the chief priests took the silver pieces and said, it is not lawful to put them into the treasury because they are the price of blood. They're saying this is blood money. Okay? And they consulted together and bought with them the potter's field to bury strangers in. Therefore the field has been called the field of blood to this day. Then was fulfilled what was spoken by Jeremiah the prophet, saying, and they took the 30 pieces of silver and the value of him who was priced, whom they of the children of Israel priced, and gave them for the potter's field, as the Lord directed me. So several things. Judas felt guilty for betraying innocent blood. He wanted to return the money, but the Jewish religious leaders refused to accept the money. Right at that point, see, it seems to me that Judas was all about political power. Okay? He thought, he was very, by the way, we have a lot of evangelical Christians who are very patriotic Americans. They're pro-America. That's not bad as long as it doesn't turn into your own religion. I consider myself a very patriotic American. That's why I hate what our government is doing right now. Because it's undoing the work of George Washington and Thomas Jefferson. But we have to be careful that we don't be like the German church, where so many German leaders and pastors were so pro-Germany that they were willing to look the other way. As long as Adolf Hitler instilled in them the feeling of pride in their nation and helped their economy, they were willing to look the other way while he put Jewish human beings in ovens. Okay? Evangelical Christians would have really liked, in America, would have really liked Judas in a lot of areas. This guy was pro-Jewish. This guy would say, you know what, I don't want the pagans to rule over us. We're the chosen nation, not those pagans. Someday Messiah is going to come, and he's going to set those pagans straight. So he was he was like everything you'd want outwardly in a young Jewish male growing up. In fact, there might have been people thinking, gee, maybe he'll be the Messiah someday. But he's very patriotic, pro-Jewish, pro-Messiah, and but he looked at the miracles Jesus was performing, and what he decided was, if I can be one of his followers, maybe I can sit at the right or the left hand of the Messiah. Maybe I can get a real big position and authority when Messiah rules the world. I would argue that Judas's God was actually political power. So when Jesus kept talking about I'm going to die, Judas realized, you know, this guy's not going to conquer the Romans. And if he's going to die like he says he's going to die, then we're going to be considered a bunch of outcasts and idiots because we followed this false Messiah. And even though Jesus is my friend, if he's going to die, I don't see how he could be the Messiah. The political power is going to shift from Jesus, this guy with tremendous charisma that's performing these miracles, and the political power is going to shift back to the Jewish high priest and the Pharisees. I need to show them that I side with them, not with Jesus. I want to become known as the man who brought Jesus down, and then they'll have a high position of honor for me with the Jewish religious leaders. But when he realized, man, he's my friend, he's innocent, they're going to kill him, I don't want this money. When they didn't want it back, he realized they think I'm a loser. They think I'm a lowlife. I've got no future with them at all. It's the same with like Benedict Arnold. Okay? Somebody calls you a Judas or a Benedict Arnold, they're calling you a backstabber and a traitor. Okay? And once he saw that they would not take the money back, he realized his political future was gone. And then they took the money. They didn't want it, so they bought Potter's Field with it. When you read Acts chapter 1, which we'll look at next week, you see that the apostles say that Judas bought the field. Well, who's right? Did Judas buy the field? Or did they buy the field? The answer is really both. They said, look, we don't want to put this in the treasury, so this is money we gave to Judas. It's Judas's money. With Judas's money, we'll buy a field in Judas's name. Potter's Field, to bury strangers. Now, Jeremiah chapters 18 and 19 and 32 speak about God commanding Jeremiah to buy a field in Judea, even though the Babylonians were ready to take over the land. And he's saying, why would you want me to buy it now? And God's letting him know there is going to be a future for the land and all. And he buys it with, I think, 17 pieces of silver. He goes to the potter's house to buy it. There's pottery vessels mentioned. So I think the Jews may have taken the Jeremiah passage as many little clues of this. But the actual prophecy is given in the book of Zechariah 11, verses 12 and 13, 400 years before Jesus walked the earth. Look at that passage, Zechariah 11. Zechariah 11, verses 12 and 13. The Jews here in this passage reject the good shepherd, so God says, okay, give the good shepherd what he's worth, give him what you think he's worth, and then the bad shepherd, you'll get the worthless shepherd, which I think is going to be the Antichrist. But in verses 12 and 13, then I said to them, if it is agreeable to you, give me my wages, and if not, refrain. So the Jewish people, they paid out his wages, so they weighed out for my wages 30 pieces of silver. And the Lord said to me, throw it to the potter, that princely price they set on me. So I took the 30 pieces of silver and threw them into the house of the Lord, the temple, for the potter. And so here you see this is all being enacted 400 years before it actually occurred. And so that's the specific prophecy. Now, for the Jews, Jeremiah was the first book of the prophets in the way the Jews put together the Old Testament, not Isaiah. And then other books in that section are often called by the name of the first book. So basically they're saying if you go to the collection of the books headed by the name Jeremiah, you will find this prophecy, and the prophecy is actually in Zechariah chapter 11. Now we're going to look some more at this next week and try to see what was going on in Judas's mind, because I tell you, let me tell you, you can never confuse political power with spiritual power. And that's what the evangelical church in America has done. We thought if we could just gain more and more political power, then they thought this is how you serve Jesus. You stand up on political issues, you speak out politically. Well, that's one of the ways you can serve Jesus. But that's not the whole deal. We thought we could change a culture by changing laws and changing leaders, when the best way to change a culture is by changing hearts, and there's no better way to change hearts than by preaching the gospel, leading people to Jesus, and discipling them. Okay? We have to be very, very careful. In Germany, they thought, wow, we got a powerful church, and if we align with Hitler, it's going to become even more powerful, and theology is not that important. All that matters is that we get this political power side by side with Adolf Hitler, and praise God that there were millions of German Christians who said no to their leaders and took a stand and try to defend and protect innocent Jews from the Nazis, and disobeyed the Nazis. But I tell you, let me tell you, never confuse spiritual power with political power, because when you do, you're not far from Judas. Okay? Many of you remember Stella. And she was up in her 90s when she went to be with the Lord, and she needed help coming to church. She needed help leaving church. That was a lady of spiritual power. Okay? You could show me the most powerful politician who's a Bible-believing Christian, and Stella probably had way more spiritual power than him. We got to acknowledge that, look, we live to worship and serve Jesus and to make his name known, okay? If we do not, we're idolaters. And we got to not only worship the true God, but we got to worship the true God the way he told us to worship him. We can't say, well, I want to worship Jesus, but I'm going to do it through, political action. And I'm not saying Christians should not get involved in politics. We're one of the few countries on earth where we've had political say, used that political say. But the fact of the matter is, we're pleasing God most when we're in prayer, when we study the Bible, and when we share Jesus with others, and we fellowship. We got to be the church. And Judas was just looking for the political power. How many of us come to church and call ourselves Christians, just because there's something in it for us, apart from God's main purposes. And let me tell you, when we fall, I hope and pray that when you fall and when I fall, that we'll be devastated because we've disappointed our God and Savior, Jesus Christ. I pray that when we fall, we would not be so devastated because our God is dead. That we put, because look, let me tell you, anything you worship other than the triune God is an idol, and God is in the business of smashing idols, and God will smash your idols someday. And if you put all your eggs in one basket, you're not going to have anything to live for. But if you're like Peter, when you fall, my God will pick you up. My God will dust you off. My God will hug you. My God will even nourish you like he nourished Elijah. Sent birds to feed him. But eventually God's going to put you back on the field and call you to be all that he called you to be, to serve in his kingdom. We got to care more about Jesus than we do about our own selfish ambitions. We got to deny self. We got to care more about Jesus than even we care about warmth or food. We'll talk more about this next Sunday. But ask John to come. And last I heard, our King is still on the throne.